Feldwebel Klaus Richter of the 21st Panzer Division, Afrika Korps, found himself in July 1943 at Camp Alva, Oklahoma, a prisoner of war. Captured 3 months earlier near Feldwebel, Tunisia, during the Axis forces' collapse, he anticipated many hardships in captivity, but payment for labor was certainly not one of them. His capture on May 12, 1943, had been surprisingly uneventful. His depleted unit, low on ammunition, was surrounded by Allied forces. Though desert campaigns had shown him defeat, nothing prepared him for the humiliation of surrender. British soldiers disarmed him efficiently, without malice, and offered water. There were no beatings or executions, just a methodical processing, much like livestock being tagged. German propaganda had painted Allied captivity in grim terms: torture, starvation, and forced labor. Goebbels's broadcasts highlighted the treatment of German prisoners by Bolsheviks on the Eastern Front, implying Western allies would be no better. Klaus, having seen newsreels of supposed Allied atrocities, largely believed them, as soldiers often do to justify fighting. The Atlantic crossing took 3 weeks. Klaus and 200 other German NCOs were packed into the lower decks of a Liberty ship, part of a convoy heading to New York. The hold reeked of unwashed bodies, vomit and seawater. Guards provided food twice daily, basic yet consistent: bread, tinned meat and soup. This was more than Klaus had consumed in the final weeks in Tunisia, when supply lines failed and his men scavenged British dumps. His fellow prisoner, Unteroffizier Manfred Bauer from Hamburg, constantly muttered that the Americans were fattening them for something worse. Klaus, however, observed the guards, who appeared bored rather than cruel. New York Harbor through the porthole was a startling sight. Klaus glimpsed the Statue of Liberty, an emblem of enemy propaganda, followed by the Manhattan skyline, untouched by bombs. No rubble, no burned buildings, just towering steel and glass, bustling docks and precision-moving cranes. Hamburg, his hometown, had been repeatedly bombed by the RAF, and Mannheim, his childhood home, was partially destroyed. The stark contrast between devastated Europe and America's untouched abundance began to register in Klaus's mind, although he tried to push the thoughts aside. A 4-day train journey followed, crossing the vast American landscape. Through barred windows, Klaus saw impossible sights: endless farmland, herds of thousands of cattle, and towns with brightly lit electric lights devoid of blackout curtains or bomb shelters. American civilians on station platforms watched the prisoner trains with curiosity, not hatred. Children waved. Klaus turned away from the window, reflecting on Germany's 4 years of war, rationing and nightly bombings. This country bore no scars. Camp Alva emerged from the Oklahoma prairie like a mirage on July 8, 1943. Wooden barracks in neat rows, guard towers at each corner, and a double barbed wire fence formed the standard POW camp architecture. It housed approximately 3,000 German prisoners, mostly Afrika Korps veterans like Klaus. Processing took 6 hours. American officers recorded his name, rank and serial number. A medic examined him, noting scabies and malnutrition, and prescribed treatment. He was issued new, sturdy work clothes, not prison rags, along with fitting boots, a razor, and soap. The barracks slept 40 men in wooden bunks with thin but present mattresses. Latrines had plumbing, and showers offered hot water twice weekly. Klaus spent his first evening observing the compound with a soldier's trained eye, assessing defensive positions and potential threats. What he saw defied expectations. Germans played soccer in a cleared field, goals marked with stones. A canteen served real coffee and sold cigarettes for camp scrip. There were no starvation rations, no forced labor gangs. Guards carried rifles but appeared relaxed and professional, not brutal. His bunkmate, Obergefreiter Hans Schmidt from Stuttgart, who had arrived 2 weeks prior from a Texas camp, offered his assessment. "You'll see," Hans said that first night, rolling a cigarette from American tobacco. They feed us 3 times a day, meat twice a week. The guards mostly leave us alone if we follow the rules. It's nothing like what we were told." Klaus remained skeptical, suspecting psychological warfare to soften them up before the real torment began. He recalled Wehrmacht intelligence reports about enemy tactics, though he increasingly doubted their reliability. The true shock came 6 days into his captivity, on July 14, 1943. During morning formation, an American captain named Henderson, with Lieutenant Weber, a German-American translator from Cincinnati, explained that local farmers needed workers for the cotton harvest. Oklahoma's cotton industry, vital to the state's economy, faced labor shortages due to military mobilization threatening crop loss. The War Department had authorized a program for POWs to perform agricultural work under guard supervision. "Participation is voluntary," Weber translated. "No prisoner will be forced to work. Those who choose to work will receive 80 cents per day, 20 cents credited immediately to camp canteen accounts, 60 cents deposited in trust funds for distribution upon repatriation." Klaus heard the words, understood German, yet failed to comprehend. Weber repeated the announcement. 80 cents a day, voluntary payment for labor. The concept seemed insane. Klaus remembered Tobruk, where Italian and German forces used captured British and Commonwealth soldiers for mine clearing and fortifications without compensation. He had witnessed occupation policies in France, where civilians faced forced labor or imprisonment. Conquered people worked at gunpoint or starved. Payment was never a consideration. The strong took from the weak. That was warfare's ancient logic. "It's a trick," Bauer whispered beside him. "They'll work us to death in those fields, then claim we volunteered. The payment is a fiction to make it look legitimate." Yet other prisoners pressed forward with questions. How many hours? What type of work? When would they start? Guards did not stop them. Henderson patiently answered through Weber. 8-hour workdays, transportation provided, water breaks every 2 hours, lunch from farmers. American guards would supervise to ensure Geneva Convention compliance regarding prisoner treatment. Klaus remained silent, observing the Americans. Henderson appeared earnest, bureaucratic, like a logistics officer solving a supply problem. The guards seemed indifferent, devoid of sadistic anticipation or cruelty, just men doing their jobs, following regulations. That afternoon, 300 prisoners volunteered for farm work. Klaus did not. He needed to observe the volunteers' experiences before committing himself. Trust was a luxury he had lost somewhere between Tobruk and Tunis. 2 days later, the first work details departed. From his barracks window, Klaus watched prisoners load into stake-bed trucks, 2 guards per vehicle, rifles casually slung. The trucks passed through camp gates toward distant farmland. They returned that evening at 1800 hours. Klaus intercepted Hans Schmidt as he climbed from a truck, cotton dust covering his work clothes. "Well?" Klaus demanded. Hans grinned. "Sunburned and exhausted, but not broken." "Feldwebel, you won't believe it. We picked cotton for 8 hours. Hard work, back-breaking really, but the farmer's wife brought lunch to the field. Sandwiches, real meat, lemonade, cold, with ice." His voice was filled with wonder, as if describing a miracle. "The farmer thanked us when we finished. Thanked us, called us boys, like we were his sons, not enemy prisoners. Then the guard handed me a chit for 20 cents canteen credit." Klaus scrutinized Hans for deception or delusion, finding neither, just honest bewilderment. Other returning prisoners shared similar stories. Farmers treated them like hired hands, not slaves. Though difficult, cotton picking demanded bent backs and bleeding fingers, but there were no beatings, starvation, or cruelty, and actual payment. The canteen chits were real. Men bought cigarettes, candy, and soap, small luxuries that made captivity bearable. Klaus spent the evening in the canteen, watching prisoners spend their 20 cents of credit on items that would have cost a week's wages in wartime Germany. The cognitive dissonance gave him a headache. These were the Americans, the enemy, the capitalist plutocrats, whom Nazi ideology claimed exploited workers and crushed the weak. Yet here they were, paying German soldiers, captured enemy combatants, for agricultural labour. Not exploitation, but transaction. He thought of home, Mannheim, partially destroyed by RAF bombing. His mother's letters, when they arrived, spoke of ration cards barely covering basic necessities. His sister worked punishing 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, in a munitions factory for wages that bought increasingly little as inflation gutted the Reichsmark. And here in enemy captivity, he could earn 80 cents daily picking cotton. The economics made no sense. That night, Klaus drafted a letter home on Red Cross stationery, which the Geneva Convention allowed him to do twice monthly. He hesitated over what to write. Should he describe the abundance, the payment for work? His mother would think he had gone mad, or that American censors were forcing propaganda. He carefully mentioned only that he was well fed and unharmed. The rest seemed too unbelievable for ink. By the third week of July, Klaus joined a work detail, partly from boredom, partly from curiosity, and mostly from a realization that resisting reality served no purpose. He needed to understand this system that contradicted everything he had been taught about enemies and warfare. The farmer, William Thornton, a weathered 60-year-old whose sons were serving in the Pacific, owned 400 acres of Oklahoma bottomland with cotton plants stretching to the horizon. Thornton met the truck, nodded to the prisoners, and showed them which rows to pick. "Work steady, don't rush, don't get heat stroke," he said through the translator. "Water barrels at the row end. Drink when you need it." Klaus bent to work. Cotton bolls were sharp against his fingers, and the sun blazed overhead. His back screamed within an hour. But Mrs. Thornton arrived mid-morning with a water cart, checking on them like a concerned mother. At noon, she returned with lunch. Not thin soup and hard bread, but thick ham sandwiches, garden tomatoes, cookies, and lemonade so cold it hurt Klaus's teeth. "My boys are somewhere overseas," Mrs. Thornton said through the translator. "I pray someone's treating them decent. The least I can do is feed you boys proper." Klaus stared at her, this enemy woman whose sons fought his countrymen, offering kindness to captured German soldiers. The moral equation shattered his understanding of warfare. She wasn't supposed to see him as human. He was supposed to be the enemy, the Nazi, the threat to her way of life. Yet she called them boys and worried about their hydration. The afternoon was long and brutal. Cotton picking was torture for backs and hands. But when the truck returned them to Camp Alva at 1800, Klaus held a canteen chit for 20 cents, real credit. The guard who handed it to him said, "Good work today, soldier." It was not mockery, but simple acknowledgement. That evening, in the canteen line, Klaus bought a Coca-Cola with his first earned American money. He confronted the reality that everything he had believed about this enemy might be wrong. The payment was not a trick. The treatment was not psychological warfare. This was simply how Americans operated, even with captured enemy combatants. They followed laws, honored agreements, paid wages, and treated prisoners as humans bound by international convention, rather than objects to exploit. Klaus slowly drank his Coca-Cola, savoring its unfamiliar sweetness. He realized that returning to a destroyed Germany after the war would mean carrying memories of the enemy's inexplicable decency. The moral complexity made his head spin. He finished his drink, returned to the barracks, and resolved to write a longer letter to his mother next week, one that attempted to explain what seemed inexplicable, that captured German soldiers in American captivity were being paid for their labor by farmers who called them boys and cared for their welfare in the Oklahoma heat. September 1943, Klaus Richter, a German POW, queues at the Camp Alva store with 80 cents, his week's cotton farm wages. The store, a converted barracks, is staffed by 2 unenthusiastic American sergeants. He watches another POW, Herman Vogel, a tank commander, buy Hershey bars, Lucky Strikes and Coca-Cola. Nazi propaganda portrayed Coca-Cola as decadent, yet Vogel declares it tastes like freedom in German, unheeded by the guards. Klaus buys writing paper, ivory soap, pencils and his own Coca-Cola. The soap, costing more than a week's black market ration in Germany, reminds him of the meagre clay and ash soap his mother described. Klaus discovers the camp library in his second week. It holds over 2,000 books, many in German, donated by Oklahoma churches. He chooses a German Tom Sawyer and an English farming manual. Ernst Hoffmann, a Gefreiter captured in Tunisia, reads Life magazine nearby, studying photos of American factories churning out tanks, aircraft and artillery. The images display endless assembly lines, women workers and mountains of finished equipment. Hoffmann, having fought in North Africa for 18 months, states, "We never had a chance. They build 1,000 bombers a month while we fight with horse-drawn wagons." Klaus examines the photos. The Willow Run plant produces a B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. Such numbers seem impossible, contradicting German propaganda that depicted American industrial weakness. Other POWs silently gather, confronting the undeniable evidence of their nation's impending defeat. Sunday morning, Klaus, out of curiosity, attends German-language services for Lutheran POWs, led by Protestant chaplain Captain Robert Henderson, a Methodist minister from Enid. Henderson, fluent in German from his grandmother, delivers his sermon without guards, among 60 German soldiers in a simple wooden chapel. He prays for peace, for the safety of all families on both sides, and for international understanding. Afterwards, Henderson converses with the POWs over coffee, discussing theology, farming, and Oklahoma weather, showing photos of his family and farm. Klaus asks why he ministers to enemy soldiers. Henderson replies, carefully in German, "You're not my enemies. You're farmers and clerks and teachers who were conscripted into a war, just like our boys. The enemy is the ideology that started this, not the men who were forced to fight." This challenges Klaus's ingrained Nazi ideology, which labelled Americans as plutocratic, mongrel, and weak. Yet here is an American who speaks his language, offers comfort, and recognises a shared humanity. On a Wednesday afternoon, Klaus and 15 other POWs are assigned to harvest wheat at Thomas McKinley's farm, 12 miles from Camp Alva. McKinley's 3 sons are fighting in the Pacific. 2 armed guards accompany the detail, but relax in the shade upon arrival. McKinley demonstrates his combine harvester, a machine that cuts, threshes, and bags wheat in one pass, a marvel compared to Klaus's family's horse-drawn equipment near Stuttgart. It does the work of 20 men. At noon, McKinley's wife, Martha, brings lunch, fried chicken, fresh bread, green beans, apple pie, and sweet tea. She serves the POWs the same portions as the guards. Martha, using simple German phrases and gestures, asks Klaus about his family. He shows her a photograph of his mother, father, and younger sister Anna in front of their farmhouse. Martha studies it sympathetically, saying in English, "We're all just trying to feed our families." Klaus understands. After lunch, McKinley offers Klaus $5 for his skilled combine operation, an extra payment beyond his camp wages. Klaus hesitates. Taking money from the enemy feels like collaboration. Yet $5 is more purchasing power than he'd earn in a month back home, even pre-war. He accepts. That evening, he writes to his mother, describing the American farm's abundance, Martha's generosity, and the advanced machinery, omitting the $5. Some truths are too painful for a family facing starvation in bombed-out Stuttgart. Every evening, the recreation yard opens. Camp Alva has a soccer field, volleyball courts, and a baseball diamond. American guards organize a softball game, POWs versus guards. They patiently explain the rules. Klaus, playing outfield, catches a fly ball, earning applause from the guards. Afterward, Colonel James Patterson, the camp commander and a West Point graduate who served in WWI France, addresses the POWs in accented German. He announces a Halloween party in October, decorations, music, special food, and encourages POWs to form a band and theatrical groups. Klaus realizes it isn't just imprisonment, it's summer camp with barbed wire. That night, discussing the day with Vogel and Hoffman, Vogel suggests they're trying to re-educate us, show us America's greatness, make us forget Germany. Hoffman counters, they're just treating us like the Geneva Convention requires, like human beings. Klaus considers both. The Americans offer more than the convention mandates. Extra food, recreation, wages, trust. None are treaty requirements. The Americans appear convinced their way of life is superior, that exposure to American abundance will naturally convert prisoners to democratic capitalism's virtues. The unsettling truth is, it's working. October brings the promised Halloween party. The mess hall is transformed with streamers, carved pumpkins, and a stage. The POW band plays American jazz and swing, learned from Armed Forces radio. Klaus tries candy corn, watches a magic show by a former professional entertainer from Hamburg, and enters a costume contest dressed as a ghost. American nurses from a nearby airbase volunteer, dancing with POWs under the relaxed supervision of guards. Klaus dances with Nurse Betty Johnson, communicating through smiles and gestures. She asks about Germany and his family. He asks about Oklahoma and her life. Their conversation is halting but warm. As the party ends at 2200, Klaus returns to his barracks confused. He enjoyed himself at a party hosted by his captors, danced with an American woman, ate candy, and laughed while his comrades died on the Eastern Front. His family suffered bombing, and his nation crumbled. The guilt is immense, yet he cannot deny the simple truth. He hasn't felt this human, normal, or alive in 4 years of war. Mail call is Wednesdays and Saturdays. Klaus receives a letter from his mother, dated September 15, 1943. The thin, rationed paper and shaky handwriting betray her malnutrition. She describes Stuttgart after an RAF raid. Their bakery destroyed, the Zimmermans killed, and food rations cut to 200 grams of bread daily, no meat for 3 weeks, and ersatz coffee. His sister Anna works 12-hour shifts in a munitions factory, exhausted and coughing. His father, too old for military service, serves in the Volkssturm, clearing rubble and bodies. His mother urges him to pray, stay strong, and remember his duty to the fatherland. Klaus reads the letter 3 times, folds it, and places it in his personal box. Then he walks to the mess hall for dinner: roast beef, mashed potatoes with real butter, green beans, fresh bread, and cherry pie. He sits with Hoffman and Vogel. They eat mechanically, tasting nothing, their thoughts on starving families in war-torn cities while they feast in an Oklahoma prison camp. The moral imbalance is stark. Klaus, a POW, receives better treatment than his family, civilians in their own country. The Americans feed their enemies better than the Third Reich feeds its citizens. This realization shatters Klaus's ideological framework. The propaganda was all lies. The 1,000-year Reich brings only death and starvation. The decadent democracy brings abundance and humanity. In November 1943, with POWs proving trustworthy, Klaus receives permission for a second weekly letter. He writes to his mother honestly for the first time, describing the superior food, recreation, and fair treatment. He mentions the farmer's trust, the chaplain's prayers, and how 80 cents at the camp store buys more than a month's wages in Germany. He omits the Halloween party and the American nurse. He concludes with a carefully phrased, forbidden thought, risking censorship. When this war ends, I hope to return home. But if Germany is destroyed, if there is nothing left, I have learned that America might offer a future worth considering. The people here are not our enemies. They never were. We were lied to, Mother, about everything. He seals the envelope, knowing censors will read it, his mother might never receive it, and that it signifies his complete ideological surrender. Klaus Richter, the faithful son of the Third Reich, diligent soldier and believer in German superiority, is no more. In his place is a bewildered young farmer from Stuttgart who has discovered his enemy treats him better than his own government and must now confront the implications as the war nears its end. Klaus Richter's return to Hamburg was a disorienting adjustment that never fully resolved itself. His family's apartment on Rothenbaum Chaussee was severely damaged, its western wall lost to British bombing in July 1943. Makeshift repairs offered little protection against the cold spring rain. His wife, Margrethe, appeared to have aged a decade since his capture at Cherbourg 3 years prior, and his 12-year-old daughter Helga barely remembered him. Their subsistence was meagre, 1,550 calories daily from British ration cards, less than half what Klaus had consumed working in Oklahoma's cotton fields. This stark reality, the near-empty cupboard, and his daughter's hollow-eyed hunger caused him a daily visceral shock far beyond abstract philosophical confusion. In those initial months, Klaus found grueling employment through the British Occupation Labour Exchange, clearing rubble from the Gengeviertel district. The work was endless and paid in rapidly devaluing Reichsmarks, supplemented by cigarette rations that, ironically, held more purchasing power. He laboured alongside former Wehrmacht officers, Hitler Youth leaders, and ordinary soldiers, all united by a desperate struggle for survival. None spoke of their time as prisoners. Those from Soviet camps were particularly silent, their emaciated forms and missing fingers speaking volumes. Klaus instinctively knew that his Oklahoma experience would be met with disbelief, or worse, accusations of collaboration. How could he explain to men whose families starved that he had earned 80 cents daily in camp scrip, redeemable for toiletries, cigarettes and beer? That he had eaten pork chops and fresh vegetables while Hamburg burned? By autumn 1946, Klaus secured a position as an assistant foreman with Weiss and Freytag, a construction firm rebuilding commercial structures in the Neustadt district. His appointment was unusual. Herr Ostermann, the site supervisor and a gruff World War I veteran, recognized Klaus's systematic approach to organizing crews and managing limited resources. Unbeknownst to Ostermann, Klaus was applying methods learned on Oklahoma farms, particularly from a farmer named Henderson. Henderson had taught him to maximize efficiency with minimal equipment, repair machinery with improvised parts, sequence tasks to avoid bottlenecks, and manage diverse crews, including Mexican braceros and German POWs. Klaus implemented similar rotating work schedules at Weiss and Freytag, boosting productivity by 18% within 3 months. When Ostermann inquired about his methods, Klaus merely replied, "During the war," and the supervisor did not press further. The Marshall Plan's launch in 1948 dramatically accelerated Hamburg's reconstruction. Weiss and Freytag won major contracts, and Klaus steadily rose, becoming senior foreman and then site manager by 1951. He oversaw the reconstruction of prominent landmarks like the Alsterer Garden and parts of the Konterhausviertel, projects demanding coordination of hundreds of workers, complex supply chains, and stringent quality standards under tight deadlines. His colleagues attributed his success to innate German precision and organizational discipline. Klaus, however, knew his adaptability and pragmatic problem-solving stemmed not from German technical schools, but from observing American farmers improvise with aging equipment and scarce parts during wartime. He had learned crew management from Henderson, who had treated German POWs with firm respect, fostering motivated workers rather than sullen captives. In 1954, Klaus's daughter Helga married Werner Schreiber, a promising young architect. At the wedding reception, Werner's father, a former Luftwaffe pilot who had endured 2 years in a Soviet camp, became intoxicated and began comparing prisoner experiences. Klaus remained silent as the elder Schreiber recounted eating watery cabbage soup, sleeping on frozen ground, and witnessing men die from untreated wounds and typhus. When pressed about his own captivity, Klaus simply stated, "American camp, Oklahoma." Schreiber, assuming similar hardships, nodded in understanding, an assumption Klaus allowed. Margaret, who had gradually gleaned more details from her husband over the years, squeezed his hand under the table, recognizing that Klaus's discomfort stemmed not from his actions but from the comparative comfort he had been afforded. Klaus retired from Weiss and Freitag in 1969 on his 60th birthday, having significantly contributed to West Germany's Wirtschaftswunder, transforming the nation from ruin to prosperity. Hamburg's reconstruction was largely complete, its port bustling, its streets lined with modern buildings, a stark contrast to the devastation Klaus had returned to in 1946. He and Margaret enjoyed a comfortable middle-class life in Eppendorf, far removed from their former bombed-out dwelling. Klaus spent retirement woodworking in his basement workshop, crafting furniture for his grandchildren with the same methodical precision he had applied to construction. He rarely discussed his wartime experiences with his family beyond essential facts. Captured in Normandy, held in Oklahoma, repatriated in 1946. In 1971, Klaus received an unexpected letter via the German Red Cross Tracing Service. It was from James Henderson Jr., son of the Oklahoma farmer Klaus had worked for in 1944 and 1945. Henderson Jr. was researching his father's life and had found camp records listing Klaus among the contracted POWs. The letter mentioned Henderson Sr. had died in 1968, but often spoke of the German prisoners, particularly that Feldwebel who could fix anything and kept the others working steady. Enclosed was a photograph. Henderson Sr. with 3 German POWs in a cotton field. Klaus clearly recognizable despite the 26 years. Henderson Jr. invited Klaus to correspond and share memories. Klaus sat at his kitchen table, staring at the photograph for nearly an hour. Margaret found him there, silent tears tracing his weathered face. He showed her the image, explaining the men and the location. She urged him to respond. Klaus drafted 3 replies over several days, each attempting to convey the profound impact of his Oklahoma experience. How Henderson's unexpected decency had shaped his post-war life. He never sent any of them. How could he bridge the chasm of experience? How could Henderson Jr. comprehend that his father's simple act of treating prisoners as workers, not enemies, had sustained Klaus's faith in humanity through Hamburg's devastation? Instead, Klaus carefully filed the letter and photograph in a wooden box with his discharge papers, tangible proof of an incommunicable experience. Klaus Richter died in October 1983 at 74, following a stroke. His obituary in the Hamburger Abendblatt highlighted his construction career, his contributions to Hamburg's post-war reconstruction, and his Wehrmacht service, mentioning his captivity only as prisoner of war in the United States, 1944-1946. Among his belongings, his family found the wooden box with his military documents, Henderson Jr.'s letter, and the photograph. Helga inquired about it. Margaret simply explained that Klaus's time in Oklahoma had been unique, that Americans treated him well, trusted him, and paid him for his labor. She did not elaborate on the wages, the cognitive dissonance, or the guilt. Some truths, she understood, transcended even 40 years of shared life between spouses. The German POW experience in the United States during World War II profoundly influenced international humanitarian standards and complicated simplistic war narratives. Over 380,000 German prisoners were held in 511 camps across the American mainland between 1943 and 1946, concentrated in agricultural states like Oklahoma, where wartime labor shortages were acute. The U.S. strictly adhered to Geneva Convention requirements for prisoner treatment, mandating wages, adequate food, and humane conditions. However, American implementation often exceeded these minimums, creating experiences that shocked German prisoners who had been fed Nazi propaganda about American brutality. Camp Alva, Oklahoma, where Klaus Richter spent 19 months, typified these agricultural branch camps. Established in 1943, it housed approximately 3,000 German prisoners who primarily worked in cotton harvesting, wheat farming, and ranching across northwestern Oklahoma. Prisoners earned 80 cents daily in camp scrip, roughly equivalent to $12 in 2024. This wage, combined with abundant food rations often exceeding 4,000 calories for workers, provided material conditions vastly superior to what most Germans experienced at home during the war. Prisoners could purchase beer, cigarettes, and toiletries at camp canteens, many even gaining weight. The stark contrast with conditions in Germany, particularly after 1943, was deeply disorienting. American farmers who contracted POW labor paid the U.S. government prevailing local wages, typically $6 to $8 daily in 1944-1945. The government retained most of this, paying prisoners the nominal Geneva Convention wage and covering camp operation costs. Despite this financial arrangement, many American farmers formed genuine working relationships with German prisoners. The severe wartime labor shortages, with millions of American men in military service, created an immense demand for agricultural production. German prisoners, many with farming backgrounds, provided desperately needed skilled labor. Farmers like Henderson, facing potential crop losses, valued reliable German workers. Some even trusted prisoners to operate expensive machinery, work unsupervised in remote fields, and make minor operational decisions. This surprising trust, incomprehensible to prisoners expecting harsh treatment, arose from both pragmatism and a rural American culture that valued competent work irrespective of nationality. The cognitive dissonance experienced by prisoners like Klaus Richter was documented in numerous post-war accounts. Prisoners who had believed Nazi propaganda depicting America as a decadent, Jewish-dominated nation instead encountered prosperous family farms, racially integrated work crews, alongside Mexican braceros, and a genuine, albeit paternalistic, kindness from farmers. Many noted the abundance of food, the casual waste, and the material prosperity of even modest American farms compared to German standards. This dissonance intensified upon repatriation as prisoners returned to devastated cities, widespread hunger, and economic collapse. The psychological impact of this contrast remained largely private, as prisoners understood that describing American abundance to starving German civilians would likely provoke resentment and accusations of collaboration. Most German POWs returned to Germany between 1945 and 1946, though some repatriations were delayed until 1947 due to labor shortages. The US government, despite pressure from agricultural interests to retain German labor, prioritized Geneva Convention compliance. Prisoners returned primarily via Atlantic ports to Bremen or Hamburg, then dispersed home. Those returning to Soviet-occupied Eastern Germany faced additional detention and interrogation. Those returning to Western zones encountered widespread destruction, food shortages of 1,500 calories daily in 1946, and widespread psychological trauma. Adjusting from American material abundance to German deprivation proved profoundly difficult for many returnees. A small number of German POWs remained in the United States permanently. Approximately 5,000 married American women they met during or shortly after captivity, predominantly in agricultural areas. Others returned to Germany, but later immigrated to America in the 1950s, drawn by economic opportunities and memories of their prisoner experience. These cases were controversial in both countries. American communities sometimes viewed former enemy soldiers with hostility, while German communities sometimes viewed emigrants as abandoning Reconstruction duties. The German POW experience in America notably influenced post-war thinking on prisoner treatment. First, it demonstrated that humane treatment improved cooperation and significantly reduced escape attempts. Escape rates from American camps were remarkably low, around 0.001%, with most escapees quickly recaptured or returning voluntarily. Second, it informed U.S. military doctrine on prisoner operations, contributing to the sophisticated POW handling procedures used in the Korean War and subsequent conflicts. Third, it provided empirical evidence that Geneva Convention principles served practical military and diplomatic purposes beyond mere moral imperatives. The agricultural labor program's legacy also shaped post-war American immigration policy and farm labor systems. The effectiveness of foreign workers in American agriculture, even under wartime emergency conditions, contributed to the expansion of the Bracero program with Mexico and later influenced H-2A visa programs. The POW labor experience proved that large-scale foreign worker programs could be administered efficiently while maintaining security and meeting production goals, impacting subsequent agricultural labor policy debates. Historical documentation of the German POW experience in America significantly expanded from the 1980s. Historians gained access to declassified military records, and aging veterans and prisoners became willing to share their stories. Arnold Kramer's 1979 book, Nazi Prisoners of War in America, was a pioneering comprehensive account. Subsequent works by Judith Gansberg, Antonio Thompson, and Michael R. Waters explored regional camp experiences, daily life, and cultural aspects of German captivity. Several camps, such as those in Concordia, Kansas, and Dermot, Arkansas, established museums to preserve historical artifacts and document local POW experiences through oral histories. Stories like Klaus Richter's complicate monolithic war narratives. While popular memory often portrays World War II as a clear moral conflict, the reality was more complex. American treatment of German prisoners, though vastly superior to German treatment of Soviet prisoners or Japanese treatment of Allied prisoners, still occurred within a context of segregated military facilities, occasional violence, and institutional racism, sometimes affording German POWs better treatment than African American soldiers. This irony was noted by contemporary observers and historians. The American commitment to Geneva Convention principles stemmed from legitimate humanitarian concerns, hopes of reciprocal treatment for American prisoners, and pragmatic labor needs. The fact that this treatment still shocked German prisoners reveals the extent to which prisoner treatment had deteriorated under Nazi influence. For individuals like Klaus Richter, the Oklahoma experience provided an unexpected education in American values, methods, and character, profoundly shaping their post-war perspectives during Germany's Reconstruction. Many former POWs applied agricultural techniques, organizational methods, and attitudes of efficiency and pragmatism to their rebuilding efforts. This subtle, unmeasured transfer of knowledge constituted a unique cultural exchange born from enemy captivity. Klaus's rise from rubble clearance laborer to construction manager paralleled Germany's economic recovery, with his success partly rooted in lessons learned not in German technical schools, but on Oklahoma cotton farms from farmers like Henderson, who prioritized competent work and practical results over ideology. That this education occurred during wartime captivity demonstrates humanity's capacity for decency to transcend the dehumanizing machinery of war, even if initially driven by pragmatic rather than purely humanitarian motives.